Hello, and a very warm welcome to this explainer. Today we're exploring a deeply touching, beautifully penned literary classic by Khushwant Singh titled The Portrait of a Lady. This isn't just a story, it's a profound exploration of the bond between a grandson and his grandmother. It's a piece that really invites us to reflect on our own elders, the quiet sacrifices they make, and the quiet dignity with which they live their lives. Together, we're going to trace the arc of this relationship, capturing the changing landscapes of time, tradition, and love.
Okay, let's dive into this. We'll be looking at the village childhood years, then that big city turning point, moving on to university and going abroad, the joyous return, and finally, a silent, feathered farewell.
Part 1. The Village Childhood Years.
We begin our journey in the village, where Khushwant and his grandmother were, above all else, constant companions. But before we look at their daily routine, let's catalog the characters we'll meet in this explainer. At the center, of course, we have the grandmother and Khushwant. But notice how expansive this cast is. We have the grandfather, whose presence is felt purely through a portrait above the mantelpiece, the parents, who left for the city to settle, the village priest, and the later city teachers. Most uniquely, we really have to include the animals, the village dogs and the sparrows, who are just as crucial to the narrative as the human characters. And finally, in the closing moments, the doctor, the author's mother, and the sweeper will play brief but vital roles.
Now, you have to look at this grandmother through the eyes of a young kid. He describes her as old, wrinkled, short, fat, and slightly bent. When people told him she used to be young and pretty, he actually writes, "The thought was almost revolting." I mean, it's such a striking idiom, right? He isn't being mean. It's just that to a kid who has only ever known her as terribly old, the very idea of her playing games or being pretty was completely absurd and undignified. He literally treated those stories like little fables.
And this brilliantly illustrates how he actually saw her. Even if he couldn't imagine her as pretty, he was absolutely certain she was beautiful. She'd hobble about the house in these spotless white clothes, one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop, and the other constantly telling the beads of a rosary. Her lips were always moving in inaudible prayer. He compares her to a winter landscape in the mountains, calling her an expanse of pure white serenity. What a stunning metaphor for the breathing peace and contentment she just radiated.
So what was their daily routine like? Well, it was a beautiful, shared rhythm. She'd wake him up to her monotonous, sing-song morning prayers, totally hoping he'd learn them by heart. She prepared his wooden slate, already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, along with this tiny earthen ink pot and a red pen. After a breakfast of thick, stale chapatis spread with butter and sugar, they walked together. The school was actually attached to the village temple, so while the priest taught the kids the alphabet, she sat inside reading scriptures. And on the walk home, they were always greeted by the village dogs, growling and fighting over the stale chapatis she threw for them.
Part 2. A City Turning Point.
Life is rarely static, is it? The story shifts abruptly when the author's parents sent for them to live in the city. To really get this phase, we look at a specific phrase from the text, a turning point, a decisive moment of change. Because even though they still shared the same room in the city, their deep, constant friendship had fundamentally shifted. The fabric of their daily togetherness just began to unravel.
Notice the stark contrast between his two educational worlds here. In the village, the school was right at the temple, with the priest teaching the alphabet and scriptures. But in the city, he went to an English school in a motor bus. His grandmother couldn't accompany him anymore. There were no dogs in the streets. When he came home, she couldn't even help him with his lessons. He's learning Western science, gravity, Archimedes' principle. And she was deeply distressed, mostly because there was absolutely no teaching about God or the scriptures.
And then, the cultural gap widened entirely over one specific thing: music. When Khushwant announced he was getting music lessons from his city teachers, his grandmother was deeply disturbed. To her traditional mind, music had, lewd associations. She firmly believed it was the monopoly of harlots and beggars, definitely not meant for gentlefolk. She didn't scold him loudly. Actually, she said nothing at all. But her silence meant absolute disapproval. She rarely talked to him after that.
Part 3. University and going abroad.
As the author grows up and heads to university, they hit a further, very physical separation. He gets a room of his own. The text actually notes that the common link of friendship was officially snapped. The grandmother, we're told, accepted her seclusion with resignation. This wonderful idiom means she quietly, without a single complaint, submitted to her new isolation. She rarely left her spinning wheel to talk to anyone. Literally, from sunrise to sunset, she just sat by her wheel, spinning and reciting her prayers.
Yet she found this amazing new outlet for her nurturing spirit. Since there were no street dogs in the city, she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard.
Every afternoon, for half an hour, she'd break bread into little bits. Hundreds of birds would collect around her, creating what the author calls a veritable bedlam of chirrupings, just an absolute, joyous uproar of bird sounds. They perched on her legs, her shoulders, even her head, and she never shooed them away. For sure, it was the happiest half hour of her day.
Let's move to a timeline and see how this builds, because it's key to understanding the story's structure. We start with childhood, where they're constant companions in the village. Then boyhood, that turning point where they share a room in the city house but start drifting. Youth brings that snapped link at university when he gets his own room. And finally, adulthood brings the ultimate test. The author decides to go abroad for further studies for 5 long years.
Now, Khushwant was certain she'd be upset by him leaving. At her advanced age, you could never really tell if they'd see each other again. But she was remarkably stoic. She came to the railway station to see him off, and showed absolutely zero sentimentality or emotion. Her mind was just lost in prayer, fingers busy telling the beads of her rosary. She silently kissed his forehead, and as he boarded that train, he cherished that moist imprint, thinking it was probably the very last sign of physical contact between them.
Part 4. The Joyous Return. Happily, that railway station goodbye wasn't their last contact. When he returns after 5 years, his grandmother meets him at the station, looking, incredibly, not a day older. She clasped him in her arms, still reciting her prayers. But what's fascinating is, even on the day he arrived, her happiest moments weren't spent fussing over him. No, it was with her sparrows. She fed them longer that afternoon, giving them frivolous rebukes, those light-hearted, playful little scoldings as they fluttered around her.
However, that evening, a sudden, profound change came over her. For the very first time since the author had known her, she did not pray. Instead, she gathered the women of the neighborhood, found an old drum, and just started to sing. For hours, she thumped the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum, the loose, worn-out leather of this completely ruined instrument, singing loudly of the homecoming of warriors. The family actually had to step in and persuade her to stop so she wouldn't overstrain herself.
And finally, Part 5, a silent, feathered farewell.
Unfortunately, the overstraining did take its toll. The next morning, she was taken ill with a mild fever. The doctor assured everyone it would pass, but the grandmother disagreed. She simply told them her end was near. Because she had missed her prayers the evening before, she declared she wouldn't waste a single second of her last hours talking to them. She completely ignored all their protests. She just lay peacefully in bed, praying and telling her beads. And then, suddenly, before anyone could even suspect a thing, her lips stopped moving. The rosary fell from her fingers, and this peaceful pallor spread over her face. She was gone.
The family laid her on the ground, covering her in a red shroud. When they came back in the evening with a stretcher to take her for cremation, the setting sun had lit up her room with a blaze of golden light. But there was something else. All over the veranda, right up to where she lay, thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. And there was no veritable bedlam this time. There was absolute pin-drop silence. Not a single chirping. Feeling sorry for the birds, the author's mother actually went and fetched bread, broke it into crumbs just the way the grandmother used to, and threw it to them. The sparrows took absolutely no notice of the bread. They hadn't come for the food at all. They had come to mourn their friend. When the family finally carried the grandmother's corpse off, those thousands of sparrows simply flew away quietly into the evening, and the final, incredibly poignant detail of the story rests with the sweeper, who came the very next morning and swept the completely untouched breadcrumbs into the dustbin.
It's an ending that really stays with you, doesn't it? It leaves us with such a profound question to ponder. What legacy of love and serenity do our elders leave behind when the music finally stops? The bonds we share, not just with each other, but with the quiet world around us, they resonate so deeply. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, keep reflecting, and I'll catch you next time.